I guess we started a little bit late. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's really hot outside and everybody wants to get to the drinks and then get home as well. But in any case, thank you for joining us. I think we have been here for the whole week together with the Malakut team, and we have mostly been talking to our Japanese clients about encouraging them to do more like transactions abroad. Whether it's M&A or whether it's early stage or growth stage investments, it doesn't really matter. There are ways to do these deals efficiently and with a little bit more, how to say, like with an approach that is more, that lends more to the traditional Japanese risk-averse approach. So we're going to be going through the presentation, and maybe we should start with a quick introduction. I'm Marcus Walter. I'm the head of corporate for Caldwell. I have been working for Freshfields in Japan for 8 years. I've been working mostly on outbound transactions for large Japanese corporates. However, I wanted to join a firm that is a more flexible platform, that is more technology focused, and where I have an actual IP team that helps me doing due diligence on the technology targets for my Japanese clients. I was lucky enough that a lot of my Japanese clients moved with me, and so we have a good deal flow now from Japanese corporates at this point, which is why we are here mostly talking to our clients. Keegan, you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you for coming out. It's an honor to be here with everyone today. I'm Keegan Caldwell. I'm the founder of Caldwell. I'm the global managing partner. And Marcus has already covered our specialties in intellectual property and in our corporate practice, and those two things working closely together. And you'll hear a lot more about that in the slides today, so that's all from me. Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you, and thank you very much for spending time with us. My name is Ben Martins. You can call me Ben's son. I spent more than 20 years with all the large brokers, so Willis, Marsh, and Aon. At final stage was Chief Commercial Officer for Aon Germany and Chief Specialty Officer for German-speaking countries. So I was overseeing all these new stuff, which is M&A, insurance, cyber, PI, IP deal, and all this kind of stuff. And since 1 year, I moved to a family-owned broker, which is located headquartered in Dubai, and the second generation. And now we run the specialties across the globe and team up with partners like Caldwell to bring more knowledge to these kind of markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you from me as well. My name is Philipp Bergs. I am a lawyer originally, German qualified. I worked for American law firms such as Caldwell and White & Case. And specialized in M&A, and a few years ago I moved to Aon to broker M&A insurance solutions. And since the beginning of this year, I joined Malakut to do this now in a global setting and to bring more innovative solutions to all different markets, including Japan, and that's why it's an honor for me to be here as well.
Okay. Taking the advantage that I am a Japanese, making a presentation in Japan, I would like to speak in Japanese. 私は安田と申します。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。私はこの業界に35年間勤務しておりまして、最初の27年間は日本の損害保険会社である東京会場に勤務しておりました。その間2回ちょうど米国駐在をして10年経験をしております。2016年にもう日本の大阪の保険会社から脱皮したいと思いまして、ロンドンのマーシという国際ブローカーに転職をしまして、ロンドンから欧州、中東、アフリカ全域の日本営業を統括する責任者を務めておりました。2019年にブレグジットというのがありまして、UK が EU から脱退したことによってロンドンから欧州大陸が見れなくなってしまったので、それで私自身はそのを機に大陸側に移りまして、それでドイツでしばらく働いておりました。いろんな行きさつはあったにせよ、途中でエオンという会社に移りまして、そこでまた引き続き欧州、中東、アフリカ、ヨーロッパですね、の日系の責任者兼現地の CCO の役割もいただいてやっておりましたけども、 この後も話をしますが、ここにいるみんなと同じようにですね、よりお客様に良いものを届けたいという気持ちで、この4月からマラクートというブローカーに転職をしました。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
Okay, we're going to start off by telling you a little bit about Caldwell. Caldwell is a premier global law firm at the forefront of innovation and legal excellence, delivering best-in-class intellectual property, litigation, and corporate advice. Our firm has a fully integrated team of IP and transaction veterans, with the IP and corporate teams working very closely together. We currently have offices in 3 major financial and innovation hubs in the world, in Los Angeles, Boston, and in Mayfair and London. And tomorrow, actually, I'm looking at a space for us here in Tokyo, which we're very excited about the prospect of coming into this market as well. We have roughly 50 practitioners across the 2 continents now, with 250 VC-backed companies. We started off as an IP boutique that was focused on working with venture-funded clients. Many of those have grown to have either PE exits or to have IPO, and we represent from very small companies at a seed stage of funding to some of the largest global corporates in the world. We've worked on close to $50 billion worth of IP-related transactions since we started about 10 years ago. We have a wonderful team of attorneys that are well equipped to handle complex corporate and intellectual property transactions, navigate the intricacies of litigation with finesse. We also bring a wealth of experience to every legal challenge, ensuring our clients receive comprehensive and strategic solutions. We've grown rapidly from our humble start in a co-working space on MIT's campus 10 years ago with just me in a windowless office to having these offices around the globe today. And we've been the fastest growing law firm in the United States the last few years, which we're very proud of. The thing that I'll end with is something that we believe is also very important, is to not just provide legal services and to not just work with as many clients as possible, but to work with a very select group of clients that we can become close with and learn their businesses well over time to best serve them, and so that they can best understand our services and that we can together cooperate to achieve excellence. So we offer legal advice in a variety of contexts, as I've already stated, and we have a very qualified team with many of whom have advanced degrees. And the team will tell you even more about our firm as we continue here, so thank you.
ありがとうございます。若干宮崎の方からサマリーとあと補足の説明の方を日本語でさせていただきます。コールドウェル法律事務所はボストン、ロサンゼルス、ロンドンに拠点を要する米国系の法律事務所です。スタートアップや VC、または上場企業まで幅広いクライアントにサービスを提供しております。2016年の創業以来、急成長を遂げておりまして、インク氏の選ぶ米国で最も急成長を遂げている非公開会社ランキング、通称インク5000では過去5年間連続でランクインをしております。IP、コーポレート、訴訟の各プラクティスグループには、テクノロジーや製薬分野等に関する米国内外の専門家が集結しており、所属メンバーの大部分はサイエンスやエンジニアリングの修士または博士号を取得しております。実際こちらにいるキーガン・コールドウェルもジョージ・ワシントン大学にて物理科学の分野の博士号を取得しております。Just to quickly summarize, you are very smart here, the PhD guys. では続きまして、マラクート様の方の説明を移らせていただきます。
So for those who prefer English, please take a look into the screen, and who prefer Japanese, please listen to my story. 私たちはマラクートという保険会社で、保険ブローカーでございまして、1999年に設立をしておりますので、約4半世紀営業しております。私どもの本社はドバイにございまして、で、ここに書いてありますように、ドバイはじめ、アルマティ、フランクフルト、ハノイ、イスタンブール、クアラランプール、ロンドン、パナマシティ、タキシタ、アンドズーリックと、チューリヒかなり言うと、に事務所をいろんなところを抱えておりまして、今、いろんなところに拠点を増やしているところでございます。 まずこれとは離れて一つだけ言わなきゃいけないのは、ドバイに本社を置く保険ブローカーっていう、例えば自分のことを挨拶しますと、皆さんからするともういかがわしい塊でしかないんですけれども、どうぞご安心ください。25年やっておりますし、中東地域においては最大のブローカーの地場の最大ブローカーというところでございますし、逆に言うとドバイに本社を置いているのは、皆さんご存知のようないろんな税制メリットですとか、あとは時差ですね。日本とは5時間、大陸とは2、3時間、ロンドンとは3、4時間という時間差の中で非常にいい仕事ができるということも一つのメリットだと思っております。ファミリーグループでございまして、今の社長はジュニアの2代目になっております。我々はお客様とブローカー、お客様と保険会社をつなぐ元請けの保険ブローカーでありますし、保険会社の保険を引き受ける再保険会社をつなぐ再保険もやっております。2つ目にポイントとして挙げたいのはですね、ここに書いてありますように、いわゆるロンドン、ニューヨークに、香港に事務所を構えてますというところではなくて、そういったもうたくさん皆さんがいらっしゃっているところにいなくて、はっきり言えば中東系ですとか、あとはスタン系ですね。今実は日本の新企業様がすごく活発に進出しているところですけれども、そういったところにおいては大手ブローカーも実は事務所を持っていなくて、全て我々の地元の免許を使っているということで、私どもが彼らの仕事をしてあげておりますし、あとは日系企業の進出が激しい中東においてもですね、商社さんをはじめ、いろんなプロジェクトが進んでおりますけれども、仮に自前のオペレーションを持っている大手ブローカーさんでも、やはり自負ですけど、中東に唯一いる日本人なものですから、いろんな案件を私経由で依頼をしてくださいといったのも2つの特徴だと思います。ここにいるフィリップ、先ほど自己紹介しましたけども、弁護士資格を持つ男でございまして、今日のテーマである M&A を専門にしております。ですから、弁護士事務所の皆さんと合わせて、このリスクマネジメント、リスクソリューションの観点から、我々はそこにマラクートとして入っているという位置づけになります。おそらく今日説明することはちょっと突飛かもしれないんですけども、実は日本というのを本当に小さいマーケットではとても手に入らないような保険が実は世界で非常に普通になってきておりますし、その中でも非常にこういったものを使って M&A が活発にされている。IT に関わるリスクはこんなふうにヘッジすることができる。そして、IP についてもこんなことでいろんな価値の提供ができるといった観点でいろんな話をさせていただきたいと思っておりますので、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。Thank you.
ありがとうございます。続きまして、本日は2名のゲストスピーカーをお招きしております。
Sure. Hello. I'm very delighted to meet you. I'm Anna from Blomstein in Berlin, and I'm one of the founding partners of Blomstein, which is actually a spin-off from Freshfields, where Marcus and I used to be former colleagues. We founded Blomstein 8 years ago for many of the same reasons that Marcus mentioned, to be a more agile and more focused law firm. Not quite in a room without windows, but with very few, in a small team of 7, and now we are about 30 attorneys and expanding. Sustainably, we are specialized for all EU regulatory topics, so in particular antitrust and competition law, international trade law, public procurement, and ESG. We advise a very international client base, including many Japanese clients from various sectors, and today I will give you a brief overview of the regulatory approval requirements for tech investments around the world, including merger control, foreign direct investment, and the EU foreign subsidies regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, good evening, everybody. I am Rob Kant, and I've been invited here to speak to you guys about the use of technology in M&A. I am a retired M&A lawyer. I did the job for about 20 years and I did deals all over the world. I was a partner in an international law firm and I did work for a number of Japanese clients. I retired from M&A itself to found a company called Single Source Technologies with a former client of mine and we have been building technology for the M&A industry. We are an AI-powered cloud-based solution, but you can hear more about us later, about why we exist, how we can help risk-averse clients, and how technology is more broadly used in the M&A process. So I look forward to speaking to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. So let's get into it. So basically, not going to spend much time here. I'm pretty sure everybody knows. We see a lot of an increase in technology investment, mainly driven by investments in AI and AI-related infrastructure. We see also with that a pickup in smaller transactions again, especially our Japanese clients are looking at lots of different opportunities given the IPO window hasn't really opened up yet. Big tech M&A is still not really there anymore at this point, given the regulatory scrutiny in the US. And therefore, what we see is smaller transactions, a lot of distressed opportunities. I'm talking about transactions in the space of where the companies are not yet in formal bankruptcy, but close to it. And we see our Japanese clients actively looking in that space and trying to pick up interesting technology on more appropriate valuations than that would have been there a couple of years ago. And just as we are going to be providing the slide deck to all participants in Japanese after the presentation as well. What we see generally, when I started working with Japanese companies in 2015, all of these tools in the, I would say, innovation toolbox were still very rudimentary in terms of the use. We have not seen a lot of fund investments or early stage investments except for companies like SBI, obviously. But since then, even more traditional Japanese corporates have really picked up this stuff. We work with a couple of them that from the outside would be perceived as being very traditional and conservative, but now they are setting up startup studios under a different brand. For example, in LA, we see them doing more direct early stage investing, and I guess that's also, it's something we want to facilitate further, because one of our passions is getting Japanese companies on the cap tables of the most interesting startups in the US and in Europe.
それでは今の話に関しまして少しだけサマリーをさせていただきます。こちら米国が中心とはなりますが、近年のテック業界に関するマーケットトレンドに関するものです。いろいろとたくさん書いてあるんですけれども、おそらく重要なポイントというのは2つだと思います。1つ目は、まず AI やデータ保護に関して今後規制の強化が見込まれることから、小型の買収案件が大型よりも増加する見込みであるということです。そしてもう1点目は、大手のハイテク企業が特に自社開発に代わり、スタートアップ、特にスタートアップの買収を積極的に実施しているということです。これに派生しまして、スタートアップの買収の中では、特に現在の資金調達が非常に難しくなってきている環境もありまして、ディストレスト M&A、日本語だと救済型 M&A と呼ばれるものがたくさん増えてきているように感じております。こちらのツールボックスに関しては、新規にビジネスを立ち上げる文脈において取り得る手段が今までもたくさんありますよということが書いてあります。実際のところ、これまでよりも、例えばですけれども、人材を、資金調達をどのように行うのか、または、ビークルをどのように作っていくのか、それから、人材をどのように獲得していくのか、様々な観点が、特に最近になって、能力が増えて、手段が増えておりまして、これらをどう組み合わせていくのがいいのか、どういう方法がいいのかというのに関して、とてもクリエイティブな発想が求められております。
Thank you, Taka. One of the reasons, or I guess the key reason why we are here together with the Malakut team is because we believe that if you leverage the right technology and put the focus on the right things, you can also Japanese companies can do their M&A, their early stage investments in a very, very efficient way. It doesn't really matter whether it's early stage investment, growth stage investment, or M&A. It's always going to be the same issues, right? It's always going to be the access to due diligence in that it depends on the amount that you invest. The time frame usually is always limited. Of course, if you're making a distressed investments, then the due diligence time frame is shorter because startup might be running out of money. The company information or due diligence information is always fully organized, especially in startups, but I mean, everybody who has done an M&A, I'm pretty sure that like as a buy-side advisor or as a buyer, there's always reasons to complain about the DD report. And so we are focusing on when we talk to our Japanese clients, for us it's really important that we make sure that they tell us what are the real value drivers in their transaction. So that we have to be realistic what we can get, but that we can really focus on those items. And very often it is actually intellectual property or certain technologies that they want to acquire. Obviously, but especially in technology-driven acquisitions or investments, you always, again, have the same issues. It's like founders' risk, it's IP ownership, it's incentivizing key employees to stay on, and then more classical due diligence items like a supplier or customer contracts. Founders' risk is a very broad topic, and we talk a little bit about IP ownership later on. But we want to try to work with our Japanese clients to go through those topics to understand what are really the focus areas for them, so that we can also focus our due diligence on those. And then, obviously, to make sure that you properly mitigate those risks that you have identified, there are various ways of doing that. You have the warranties. You have indemnities for disclosed liabilities or liabilities that you found, and then you have, which is especially for our Japanese clients, a more and more important instrument on early stage, on early stage investing, on M&A, but also in distressed situations is the usage of transaction insurance.
ただいまの話ですが、DD に関しまして特に重要なことを簡単にサマリーさせていただきたいと思います。デューディリジェンスは往々にして考慮すべき要素がとても多い一方で、時間ですとか開示資料に関してはかなり限定的になることが多いかと思います。そのため必要なのはメリハリです。これはアーリーステージの投資であれ、通常の M&A であれ、ディストレス M&A であれ、基本的には変わらないポイントだと思っております。例えば、買収案件では、他にどのような論点が問題となり得るのかをあらかじめ注意しておき、アドバイザーと買収者があらかじめそこに関して握っておくことがとても大切だと思います。例えば、製薬関係のお話であれば、レギュラトリーマターがとても大切なことになりますし、テック系の新興企業であれば、IP 周りの権利関係が適切に保護されているのか、キーエンプロイーが買収後も引き続き勤務するのかが重要なファクターになるかと思います。こちらの点に関しましては、後ほどキーガンからも説明があると思います。
So at this stage, at the due diligence stage, we often coordinate with the lawyers because this is where we as an insurance broker come in as well. We want to take risks that come up in an M&A transaction and which may or may not be exposed in due diligence, and we want to take them out of the transaction to make it easier for the parties to agree on a purchase agreement. And the basis for that is the due diligence that the lawyers do. Because the condition for coverage by an insurer is always that thorough due diligence has been conducted by the parties. And in that case, it's very important for us to align with the lawyers early to define the perfect tailored due diligence scope for this specific transaction, so that all the warranties that the seller will ultimately give to the buyer under the purchase agreement are due diligence. Usually, as far as due diligence work streams, we expect, or insurers expect, legal, financial, and tax due diligence. That is an international standard, which you, I'm sure, will also have seen In some cases, especially if IP is of particular importance to a transaction, there might be additional technical due diligence. All of this can be conducted early, anticipated, and done very efficiently if we coordinate with our legal partners such as Caldwell. In terms of the due diligence style, I know from the markets that I've seen that clients often do not want to pay extraordinary amounts on due diligence. And the insurers are aware of that and are willing to deal with that. So red flag due diligence reports, meaning due diligence reports that really focus on the risks and do not expand over hundreds of pages, are common and accepted. But it also helps to just show insurers, okay, we have looked at these and these topics, and you can be comfortable that we did a thorough exercise and we did not find out any issues. Or whatever issues there are, we can deal with and insure them separately to the benefit of both seller and buyer. And then final point on this is just from our experience, if possible, always engage with us early. We can anticipate a lot, but what is not said there, if necessary, we can also do this on the very short notice. Thank you.
この後もう少し細かい話をしますけれども、ここではコンセプトとしてリスクをヘッジするために保険がどうやって使えるか、でその保険を有効活用するためにはどういったことを気をつけるかというところの入り口をご説明します。やっぱり保険を最大活用するというのはすごく大事なところなので、ただ皆さんには保険を使うということはすごく後ろ向きなちょっとイメージがあるかもしれないんですけども、2つありまして、1つはやっぱりその開示をすることによってよりリスクをヘッジしやすくなるということと、2つ目はかといってそんなにすごく手間がかかるわけではございませんということです。でデューデリジェンスはもうやっぱりM&A とかのトランザクションに関わる時の必須なもので、逆に言うとその情報によって保険会社はリスクの審査をさせていただきます。で、あとはですね、いわゆるその M&A に関わる以外のところ、ここに書いてありますけど、リーガル、ファイナンシャル、タックス、こういったものも実はそのいわゆる普通に一言で言うと表明保証保険と言われるものの外で、保険化することができますので、これはできないよねとか、こういったことって実は一番リスキーなんだけど、保険で持ってもらえないんだなって思わないで、逆にご登壇いただくことによってそういうことがすごくカバーを広げたり、別手配することができる。その柔軟性をちょっと考えておいていただけたらと思います。で、DD スタイルですけども、レッドフラッグレポーツということで、いわゆる危ないところだけのっていうのはすごく大事なんですけども、それ以外に別にそんな多くのことは求めてないんですね。だから極めて簡単な基礎的なチェックを情報として頂戴することによって、我々ブローカーはいろんなことでアクションを取れることができますので、まずそこに対する毛嫌いというものは持たないようにしていただけたらと思います。でも何よりもとにかく大事なのは最後でして、Get in touch with us early ということで、早めにご相談いただくことが大事で、なぜか保険っていうのは日本の場合最後に回されがちでして、買収がまとまりそうなんだよね。いつクロージングですか？来週なんだよ。そのタイミングからやるとですね、やっぱりこの手配をするとき足元見られるので分かりやすいことですね。やっぱりいい条件、いい値段っていうものをなかなか引き出しにくいし、我々としてもより良いものを作り上げることに時間がかかるので、やっぱり早めにご相談いただくことがとても何よりも大事です。
All right, here's a list of common due diligence items. Defining and prioritizing your IP, the significance of IP to a transaction, identifying IP ownership, the rights, that's a very common item in due diligence. Verifying records and ownership, it's the same. An assessment of the IP protection, exactly what is it covering. Review of IP assignments, founder issues, compliance, regulatory things, and evaluation of any strategy and future plans for use of that IP once the acquisition has taken place. I want to specifically point out some areas of importance in IP due diligence, and being number 1 and number 4 and number 8. at the beginning of a transaction, deciding that intellectual property is important to this transaction at all. Intellectual property can have great value to M&A transactions. We just finished an $800 million transaction. That's $200 million of that was because of the IP value in that, the future tech value in that transaction. But there's also other situations where there can be very little value associated with the intellectual property, and it's very important to assess that, whether selling or buying in an M&A transaction. Another very important part is the evaluation of the IP strategy and the future and potential IP. Does this strategy and does the IP cover the key products and that are revenue generating for this particular entity? And what is the strategy going forward? Do we have a forward-looking IP strategy that is predicting where we are going to go in the market after this and where others will go? These are all considerations that are important, that are, I would say, 90% of the time missed by folks doing due diligence on intellectual property. Switch to the next slide, please. Both at the same time. This gets into more of the IP-specific issues, but again, I think that IP ownership, open source compliance, these are very common issues. Founder issues, they're common but very important. Founder issues also can happen commonly. It's important to contemplate those as well. Having an IP protection strategy is of particular importance. If you have inadequate IP protection and you have a product that's beginning to scale and having considerable market penetration, then you may have considerable liability because you do not have a monopoly on practicing the technology or manufacturing the product that's generating the majority of your revenue. For a very small investment, these things could be protected and they should be noted during a transaction. I think that's what you want for this today.
先ほどデューリリジェンスの概要についてご説明差し上げましたが、ここでは少し絞って IPDD というのは何なのかというのに関しまして少しだけ概説をさせていただきます。ここで日本のプラクティスと米国のプラクティスが少し違うかなと個人的には考えているところでして、日本のプラクティスの場合ですと基本的には不動産 DD のアナロジーとして行われることが多いと思います。これはちょっと細かい話になってしまいますけれども、知的財産権保制度というのは基本的には日本の場合ですと所有権ですとかああいう物件のようなものとして作られているんです。ですのでそれのアナロジーとして IPDD に関しても不動産関係は特に専門に取り扱っている方とかが行ったりするんです。ただですね、こちらでは IPDD で主に何をやるのかっていうのをいくつかリストアップしてみたんですけれども、物件、不動産の DD とはやはり随分と違うなと思います。具体例として先ほどキーガンの挙げていたのは1番と4番と8番かと思います。この1番というのは実際のその対象会社の中で重要な IP っていうのはどれですかっていうのはまずは特定をすること、あと優先順位をつけること、こういったところですね。で、4番に関しましては特に会社の例えば対象会社で欲しい主力製品みたいなのがあった場合にですね、それが適切に保護されているんですかっていうのをちゃんとチェックをすること。それから8番の場所に関してはですね、IP の価値評価等まで踏み込んで検査をすることになります。で、特にこういう1番、4番や8番というのは、少なくとも自分が経験した中ではあまり日本のプラクティスではなかったところですので、かなり特徴的かなと思っております。また、ここからはちょっとセールストークになってしまうかもしれませんが、これで1番、4番や8番みたいなことができるためにはですね、例えば、テックやライフサイエンス関係でしたらば、その業界の知見というのもどうしても必要になりますし、あとは、米国独特の召喚集、それがヨーロッパの場合には欧州の召喚集に関して深く知っているアドバイザーが必要になります。なので、その点では、かなり知財 DD というのは難しいものではあるんですけれども、他方でかなり価値があるのではないかというふうに考えております。もちろん全ての知的財産に関して、この1番から8番全部やりましょうっていうわけではなくてですね、先ほど申し上げたようにメリハリが一番重要ではあるんですが、最も重要なものに関しては、こういった1から8まで全部やること、これも選択肢のに含まれるのかなと考えております。
Maybe before getting into this, just like I think to highlight on the IP point, I've been doing like obviously lots of due diligence and been running lots of due diligence on large transactions when like working with Freshfields for large global clients. The thing that strikes me and or struck me back then as well is that like even on technology-driven transactions, very often the IP due diligence was just a tick the box exercise. It was just like, okay, they have patents. Are their patents registered in their names? Ah, yes, they are. Ah, okay. That's not enough. If you are actually interested in acquiring the technology or acquiring a business because of the value of its technology, you want to make sure that the technology that they are protecting is actually aligned with the business case, is actually part of the revenue model. But that means your lawyers need to look into those patents and make sure what's in there. The same thing is true what Keegan mentioned. Also, obviously, you want to increase the value or you want to integrate the business going forward. So you might want to have a better understanding what the IP strategy is going forward in terms of developing new IP, in terms of what kind of protection strategy they can use to create a moat to defend the business case. All of these things are sometimes much more important than the things that are currently done in IP due diligence. Not to say that especially when we did IP due diligence for funds, it was really just about like, okay, they have patents, okay, put another zero on the valuation. Of course, I'm exaggerating, but it is an issue, which was one of the reasons that why I changed from the big law firm to a smaller law firm that has exactly that expertise and the more strategic approach to IP. On the distressed stuff, I'm not gonna, like, again, we're already running out of time, and we all want to get to the bar. Just like the one thing, distressed, as we said, like this is something we see very often, and it warrants a completely like separate conversation. But it's also manageable, also for Japanese clients. A distressed M&A is manageable. We have all the usual due diligence stuff. Of course, the timeline even gets worse, and you have additional due diligence items you need to look at, especially like the covenants in the debt documents, whether they are already at risk of being breached or being breached already, because that will obviously impact the assets. And then, from a financial perspective, you want to look at liquidity, cash flow, and credit issues. So I think we can move on to the next. That slide already looks very text heavy. I'm sorry for that, but again, the point is that we are also providing it after the seminar more as a brochure for everybody to look it up afterwards. What I'm going to be saying here is basically, again, whether we do early stage investing for our clients, whether we do M&A, there is a bunch of things, a bunch of different concerns, but there are also the relevant protections for the clients. Of course, you can have governance rights like board observation, board representation rights. We need to look at transfer rights, put options, redemption rights. All of these things are very important. We need to look at them. We need to discuss them with our clients. And we would just encourage everybody to really take the time to sit down with their advisors and to understand what is important for them in terms of their contractual protections. All of these things you will find in all the standard documents that are out there, and they will likely end up in some way or another in the transaction documents. But it makes sense to ensure that your advisors really understand what are the key points for you, because then we can spend more time on those, refining those, negotiating those, and making sure that you get them. For our clients, for our strategic clients especially, it's of course the last point, strategic cooperation, which can mean everything. Like it can be common licensing agreements, can be distribution agreements, R&D agreements, whatsoever. very often we find that that kind of commercial collaboration is very, very interesting for our Japanese clients. Moving on here, I guess we can skip that part. I think for M&A transactions, again, every law firm has their standard SPA. You go if you ask your advisor, please mark up the standard SPA that the other side sent you. Again, for us, our approach is a bit more strategic. What we would be doing, again, is sitting down with our client, with the business team, trying to understand why they are buying the business, and then be a little bit more creative also on the warranties, which then causes more work for the brokers and the insurers as well, because we need to get all of them insured as well, usually. But then we need to think about warranties. What was the IP protection strategy? We need to think, of course, open source is much more common warranty now, but we started looking at those much earlier. We need to cover the founder risk that that the IP is properly assigned, but also that there are no disputes with founders that have already left the company. We need to look at social media risks. We need to look at connected liabilities, especially for platform businesses. All of this, not all, but a lot of them, you will not find in your standard SPA template, even nowadays. And again, we encourage everybody to challenge their advisors a little bit more in terms of, do you actually focus in your 90-page SPA on the things that are the value drivers for this transaction for us? Again, distressed, also manageable. When we talk about out of court, you still get proper protections, usually in the SPA. I mean, it's questionable how valuable they are if if the sell side is gone a couple of weeks after the transaction. When it's in court already, then you can just basically you hardly get any warranties but in any case also you have nobody that is standing behind them and accepting liability for those. For me, again, one of the most interesting talking points for our Japanese clients is the W&I insurance in distressed situations.
Yes, maybe just to briefly add to that, W&I insurance has become the standard for transactions globally, private M&A transactions, and it basically means transferring the liability of the seller under the SPA to an insurer. And what is new is that this is now also available for distressed transactions, and that can mean from the very beginning of financial troubles to really insolvency proceedings. And during that time, if a target is to be sold, then it will be hard to get warranties from the seller. If the seller is even still in charge, maybe it's an insolvency administrator. And at that point, it can be especially useful and helpful to have an insurer that is willing to give the warranties directly itself. That's why we call it synthetic warranties. So there are no warranties in the purchase agreement, but only in the policy. And the insurer kind of gives the comfort to a potential buyer to enable the transaction in the first place.
今の一言で除かさせていただきますと、当て時期が W&I インシュランスのディストレスというところなんです。消えちゃったけど、ディストレスのケースであってもですね、保険での対応が可能ですということだけ覚えておいてください。
Maybe since we are already here, adding a bit to insurance as an enabler of transactions. So like I just mentioned, W&I insurance, warranty indemnity insurance, is the standard now in a lot of jurisdictions already for private M&A transactions. It allows sellers to get rid of their liability that they would normally have for the warranties they give in a purchase agreement. And it also, in many cases, allows purchasers to get way broader protection than it would otherwise get under a purchase agreement. And it also frees up the capital that the seller receives, so money does not have to be put in escrow after the purchase is closed. W&I is just a basic concept, and since M&A markets in a lot of parts of the world are in a bit of trouble right now, it has more of a deal enabling function, which means in some cases W&I is more necessary to make a deal even possible. But also, and that is mentioned here as contingent risk insurance, there are now insurance solutions for individual risks that may be identified in the course of a transaction. So maybe you see that selling a target leads to a tax liability, or there is an ongoing litigation at the target that is supposed to be sold, and that makes it difficult for the parties to agree on a purchase price. Generally, as long as this is a legal risk, it can be extracted and it can be insured separately for a fraction of the price of the risk. So if it's a tax risk of 10 million, it might just be 1.5% of that, but that is the lowest we've seen price to insure that risk and completely get rid of it for the purposes of the negotiations. The principle I've laid out there on the right basically means as long as there's a legal risk that you encounter in your dealings, please feel free to get in touch with us. We will either be able to give you an answer right away, whether that's insurable, or we will check at no cost to you and let you know. We will either be able to give you an answer right away, whether that's insurable, or we will check at no cost to you and let you know. The same, and Marcus already referenced the matter of minority investments. W&I insurance used to be just available for 100% purchases. That also is no longer the case. We have seen it now in financing rounds, so really early stage investments where the sellers wanted to have potential investors be more comfortable with the business they were buying into, even if just a minority investment. And now insurance solutions are available for that as well, which make targets in many cases more attractive to potential investors. This is somewhat a summary of what I laid out. Basically, by transferring the liability from a seller to a buyer, the seller has the benefit, obviously, of not being liable, rest easy, and also get rid of the issue of having to put money in escrow for potential claims that can arise years later. Instead, they can distribute the funds that they receive in the transaction. The buyer has the benefit that it makes it much easier to negotiate protection under the SPA and including an insurer so that they receive full protection for their purchase. And for known risks, for identified risks, as just said, those, as long as there is a reasonably low probability of the risk being realized, but a potentially significant exposure, we can extract that, we can insure that separately. This is possible in an M&A transaction as well as outside of it.
では手短にまとめさせていただきますけれども、とにかくこのページで一番大事なのは、私が日本人でこちらで働いてたとしたら、要は題名です。Insurance as an enabler ということで、要は保険っていうと何かがあった時の万が一のための保証っていうイメージが皆さんにあるかと思いますけども、保険を買うことによって自分がやりたい行為を可能にさせる、そういうことです。要は買いたいもしくは売りたいっていう行為があっても、なんかいろんなスタディをしてても向こうの見えないリスクってあるんじゃないか、いくらスタディしても見えないところってきっとあるよね、上からも何か聞かれて自分としても最後のボタンが押せないって言った時に、それを全部保険でヘッジしちゃいましょうっていうことです。すごく乱暴な言い方ですけど、そういうことによって自分たちがやりたい行為をどんどんできるようにするというふうに、保険を使うことによって M&A を可能にする、グレーだったものを白にする、そういうふうにご理解ください。でセラーから売り手がですね、その責任をちゃんと保険によって飛ばすことによって双方がいい関係で終われるということですね。で、さっきも触れましたけど、コンティンジェントリスクということで、いわゆる表明保証保険の外にもタックス、リティゲーションなどの保証をすることもできます。で、プリンシプルとしては、結局はご相談いただければ、今のこのお金がダブついているマーケットだとですね、いろんなことが何でも保険できるような時代になってきますので、柔軟な発想を持っていてくださいということです。 で、これは別に大型案件に限ったことではなくて、小型、スタートアップ、どんな形であっても絶対保険化できるということで、これは私たちの案件には当てはまらないよねっていうふうに思わないでください。これはまた簡単にまとめてますけども、セラー、売り手としてのベネフィットというのは、売ることによって、保険を手配することによって、自分はもう一切の手を離すことができるから、いわゆるこれはまだグレーですねということで、交渉が長引いて、そのための保証として担保を取っておく必要がない。要はもう売ったら売ったで、それをお金でまた次の事業を進めることができる。買い手は買い手で、逆に言うと、その保険があるから、もうそれを持って、セラーとはやり取りしなくても済むようになると。何かあったらそれは保険から回収すればいいよねっていうことで、極めてクリーンカットでできるということになります。あとはさっきのもしもの時のなんですけども、リーガルリスクですね、法的リスクみたいに、まあ起きないと言っても起きたらすごい数十億、数百億になるってケースは実は本当によく起きてるんですけども、そういったものも保険化が可能ですということです。
続きましての次のセクションでは、ボーレススタイン法律事務所よりアンナ氏にご説明いただきたいと思います。アンナ、would you like to speak about the regulation environment?
Sure. So just to add that it's almost never too early to think about potential regulatory approval processes because they can constitute a significant factor in the overall transaction as well, particularly in timing and costs, and of course also in terms of overall risk management and deal certainty. And since all of these aspects can have effects on the agreements, on the SPA, and they should be thought about very early on. The best outcome is if you identify no approval requirements, because then we don't need to worry about it. But if we identify them, the approval processes can take from 2 months after signing up to 1 year or more, depending on which jurisdictions we are and how many jurisdictions. So it is really crucial to plan ahead and also provide safeguards in case approval is not granted in the underlying contract. We can generally differentiate 4 main groups of regulatory regimes. So you see them here on the left side of the slide, the antitrust regimes, merger control in a lot of jurisdictions, foreign direct investment control in an increasing number of jurisdictions, the foreign subsidies regime for investments specifically in the EU, and then there are a number of sector-specific rules. All of these have a different scope of scrutiny. Merger control aims at preserving competition in the market. FDI regimes are concerned with national security concerns. FSR is a specific European regulation to prevent distortions from public funding. And the sector-specific regimes obviously depend on the type of investment, but specifically for the tech sector, you should be aware that there is increasing regulation, particularly relating to AI, also to chips. In the telecom sector, we've seen specific regimes for a number of years. And then recently, digital markets generally that are dominated by tech giants are on the radar of a lot of regulators and subject to specific laws in the US, in the EU, in the UK, and many more countries. So what does it mean if we look on the right side of the slide? If we do identify a filing obligation, either in one or several countries, it generally has implications for how the parties can interact until the transaction is closed. So for example, in jurisdictions where a merger control filing is required, and also for the foreign direct investment, there is usually a standstill obligation until all competent authorities have issued a clearance decision. What does it mean? It means that the parties must not implement the deal until clearance has been granted, and any infringement to the standstill obligation can be subject to severe fines, which is called gun jumping. For example, just to give you an idea how significant these fines can be, in the EU, the European Commission has recently imposed a fine of 432 million on Illumina, a pharmaceutical company, for a gun jumping infringement, and that basically exhausted the absolute maximum under the statutory regime of 10% of the company's worldwide turnover in the last financial year. If the parties to the transaction are competitors, they must also comply with the provision to exchange competitively sensitive information until closing. And why is this important? It can be already problematic in the due diligence phase, where investors usually want to see sensitive KPIs in order to form a view on the value of the target. So it is very important to act correctly already in the early stage of the transaction, because again, an infringement can be subject to severe fines. There are possibilities to structure the information in a compliant way. So for example, if you have a clean team agreement or a separate data room, but it is something to be aware of and to discuss with the advisors from the very beginning. If we go briefly to the next slide, just to look at some recent trends for the specific regimes, I won't cover all the points on the slides, but in a nutshell, the FDI frameworks vary greatly across the jurisdictions, so every jurisdiction needs to be looked at carefully depending on where the investment sits. The investors must carefully assess the structure of the transaction, the nature of the investment, the parties, and the sector that is involved. The framework can either require an approval or just a voluntary notification, which can be advisable in some cases because the authority can usually pick up the transaction ex post and start an investigation later on, so even after closing. So where we have a critical case, it can be advisable to secure the consent early on. Typically, the filing requirement is only triggered where foreign investors acquire stakes in critical infrastructures. In very sensible industries such as energy, water, or defense and security intelligence, the threshold can be low as 10%, and in other industries it's usually more towards 20-25%, but still this shows that it concerns minority investments. Generally, it's fair to say that the smaller the stake, the less likely a filing requirement is triggered, but still we must be careful because, as I said, minority stakes can be caught, and especially where they are accompanied with certain investor rights or certain access to additional information or to the management of the company. I think what you should know as a general trend is that the importance of FDI is increasing worldwide. More jurisdictions adopt FDI screening mechanisms, particularly in the EU. We have a regulation that obliges all states to have a screening mechanism, but also in the US and in many other countries, the screening procedures are tightened, so the enforcers are looking much more closely, and there are more and more sectors that are included in the bucket of the critical infrastructure, so particularly in the technology field, it's fields like AI, robotics, semiconductors, and cybersecurity. Just to finish, I think prohibitions are still quite rare, and it's fair to say that at least in the EU, the focus is mostly on Chinese investors and now also to some extent Middle East. I think Japanese investors are generally not considered as a concern, but still they need to undergo the approval process. And as you probably know, in the US, for example, President Biden recently stopped the acquisition of US steel by Nippon Steel. So there, the CFIUS review is still pending, but it shows that Japanese investors can also be under scrutiny. Then if we go to the next slide to say some words on antitrust, there is the same story that the frameworks differ quite significantly from each jurisdiction. They're usually turnover based, so we look at the turnover generated in the respective jurisdictions and the understanding of what constitutes actually a merger subject to control is mostly aligned, but there's also some differences. Typically, it's where a majority stake or control is acquired, so for low ownership investments made by funds, a merger filing requirement is generally less likely, but there are rules on minority acquisitions that should be assessed carefully, and each jurisdiction must be looked at separately. So for example, in some jurisdictions like Brazil or also Germany, 25% is already the threshold where a filing obligation is triggered, irrespective of what kind of investment it is. And then lower stakes can also be subject to scrutiny if the shareholding is vested with certain rights that go beyond the mere investor protection. So if you have certain veto positions on strategic measures or a board seat or a seat on the advisory board, that can also be a critical factor. The trends, specifically for tech investments, that I think are important to point out is that early stage companies, even though they generally pose less of a filing risk because they often don't reach the turnover threshold yet, we do see an increasing appetite by competition authorities worldwide to gain jurisdictions and to do everything to gain jurisdictions in order to have a possibility to review the transactions. And we saw this in investment rounds for tech mavericks, such as when Microsoft invested in OpenAI. This called the attention of many enforcers around the world, including the European Commission, Germany, and the UK. And there were also increasing focus on so-called killer acquisitions, so where an established player tries to buy a small emerging company with a very innovative business model. Those are generally looked at critically as well. Facebook, WhatsApp was a transaction already a couple of years ago, but where this was not subject to regulatory approval, but then the enforcers were alarmed because they thought this is something they will need to look at in the future. And just because I saw it on an earlier slide, acqui-hires is also an important buzzword. This is a strategy by many tech companies who try to come up with a way of buying know-how. So by hiring critical employees of another company or by poaching entire teams from a tech company instead of buying shares as a way of escaping regulatory scrutiny. But both in the US and the EU, the authorities are alert to this kind of contractual mechanism, and they are increasingly looking at that as well. And then finally, I want to say, this is actually not the slide, but just so you've heard it, on foreign subsidies regulation. This is the regulation introduced by the European Union to address distortions in the EU internal market caused by public subsidies granted by non-EU governments. So the Commission wants to look closely at investments in the EU or bids in public tenders from companies that have received public funding from governments outside of the EU because they wanted to close the gap. As in the EU, we have a very strict state aid screening mechanism to look at all the funding of member states within the EU. And so the purpose of this regulation is to close this gap and also require certain filings from companies that have received loans or state aids or guaranteed or capital injections, certain tax benefits from government. Again, mostly China is under the radar, but formalistically it concerns all non-EU governments. So just to, you have heard that there may be a specific review process and a filing requirement as well. I think that's as much as I wanted to say. If you have any questions, we can cover them later on, but I would leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. 基本的に時間がないので、こちらのスライドに関して詳述することは控えたいと思います。ただ、一点だけ面白いなと思うのは、日本だとあまりないんですけれども、このように、競争法関係、または行政法関係のブティックファームというのがたくさんあります。で、これに関しても完全にセールストックになってしまうんですけれども、 我々のようにテック関係にフォーカスをした中規模の法律事務所であっても、例えば行政法や競争関係が関係するのであれば、このようなブティックファームとの手を組むことによって、そちらもカバーができる。かつその方がコントロールもできますし、あと日系の特に大型の法律事務所と比べますと、安価にもできるのではないかという、あくまでもご紹介です。
Yeah, we keep that one very short as well. We just needed to mention it because every single time we've seen a transaction, every single time we talk to somebody about why a transaction failed, post-merger integration somehow comes up. Why is that the case? Because very often it's not really taken into account when you do a due diligence on the company. Often, actually, we have seen cases where it was a technology transaction, technology DD wasn't done properly. It turned out after the acquisition that the tech systems that were acquired couldn't be integrated in the company that acquired it. Obviously, there are cultural things that need to be taken into account. Another very important thing is, if we move on to the next slide, is really simply taking your DD results and then trying to, or DD issues, and then fix them post-closing. You have, very often we see all these expensive DD reports, legal, financial, operational, tax, and then afterwards, it's like they're rotting somewhere on a desk, rather than taking these issues and actually trying to fix them post-closing. Again, this is often because also the advisors are more of consider themselves to be just there for the deal execution, just getting the deal done. Investment bankers are being paid that way, and lawyers very often just want to go on and do the next deal, rather than actually caring about the success. Important issue that also we want to take into account right from the beginning, or especially when it comes to how we use the IP and ensuring that we fix the DD issues post-closing. And Rob is going to talk about tech tools that can be used to do that. Let's move on. All very well-known issues. I think we can just go to the last slide in that chapter, which is, this is really just really rough guidance of what companies can expect when they take a certain equity stake. Of course, the percentages really vary. But what is important at that point is to say, very often we actually see Japanese companies to be too or not demanding enough when they are looking at these rights, when they're looking at all the veto rights, the board observer, board representation rights, because sometimes they don't want to be perceived as being too aggressive. Sometimes it's an issue that they think they are, if they take a directorship in a company in the US, there are liability concerns and fiduciary duty concerns. All of these things can be discussed, can be taken into account. Again, for the directors, you can talk to an insurance broker, especially some here at Sogo in Tokyo, can explain to you the different coverage options also for a directorship in the US, which are very different than from what you get in Japan. And we just want to encourage our clients to be more demanding, to be in a better position, not only to monitor their investments, but also to actually gain strategic value from them through information rights, through board representation, and to position themselves maybe for later acquisitions through pro rata rights, super pro rata rights, and so on. And maybe move on to the next point. We are a relatively small firm, focusing on really embedding ourselves with our clients, but to be able to still deliver on large transactions, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, we need to team up with firms like Blomstein and Anna, who provide us the expertise on FDI and on antitrust on a global scale, which generally our size enables us then to, in every jurisdiction, work with the best local partner, not necessarily always the most expensive and biggest name. And that is a brilliant flexibility. But what we need to do is to basically really be aggressive in terms of using technology. On the corporate side, we are doing that with various AI-enabled tools, and I know everybody has been talking about using AI in due diligence since, I don't know, a decade ago. Wasn't really done, but the LLMs now are finally there and powerful enough. Now it's about embedding them in your workflow and making it trustworthy enough and auditable so that we can use them. We use that now relatively successfully on the corporate side, and on the IP side, that's basically the origin of the firm.
Yes, when I started Caldwell, I knew that we needed to distinguish ourselves from the 150 and 200-year-old law firms that existed. I could never compete with the level of prestige that those law firms have because they've been around for so long and are so well established. But I knew that I could be more agile and adopt and create my own technology solutions within the firm, or at least I was inspired to do so and thought that I could. We took it upon ourselves to create our own AI ML 9 years ago, almost a decade ago. And putting that into use as an in-house tool to help us get to the easiest patent examiners and patent offices across the world. That tool has transformed the way that we did business at our firm and helped us grow into being the fastest growing law firm in the United States. We did that by basically efficiently increasing our efficacy by nearly 38% over what the top 10 largest firms do. So the top 10 largest firms in the world, their average rate of allowance for getting patents is like 62 to 65%. We have over 99% rate of allowance. So it was a massive increase in our ability to create efficiency for our clients and to get results for our clients. This is translated into us having a skill set that allows us to work with partners, some of the largest LLMs in the world, where we're working with multiple partners to make sure that we're going to end up working with the right one, the one that has the LLM that is going to change the way that all of us do our jobs. And we have a jump start on what we believe that any other firm would be doing.
我々はテク系に強い法律事務所として、今流行りでもありますけれども、AI を使った作業の省力化というのに大変注力をしております。これに関しましては、また後ほど、もしご興味がありましたら、詳しくご説明したいと思います。では次のスライドに移ります。Robin, would you like to speak about what the M&A looks like today?
Absolutely, and I will keep it brief because I'm conscious that you have drinks to go to, and I'm sorry I cannot join you. So, first of all, I will summarize this slide with what does M&A look like today. The starting point is it's an industry that is sized between $3 and $6 trillion a year. So it's huge, but the broad patterns of deal making are essentially the same irrespective of sector, irrespective of geography, and if you look back over the last several decades, very little has changed. So that is the core summary of where M&A is today. It's large, it hasn't changed much. So we can move on to the next slide unless you want to translate that into Japanese before we move on. I will move on to the next slide, which shows exactly the point I was trying to illustrate in the last slide, which is that the evolution in M&A is kind of laughable. There's very little that has changed. When you pick out the key milestones in the evolution of M&A, they are things like the creation of Microsoft Excel, which I understand was in 1985 and is still being heavily used. People started using emails, and essentially very little in between until the explosion of generative AI, which was actually in 22, not 23. So if we move on to the next slide, you'll see when we think about technology in the M&A space, you can broadly break it down into 5 buckets. I won't go into the details of what these products are or the different areas, only to highlight the point that you have very little technology that is actually specifically designed for M&A. Most of these brands that you see there, with the exception of the CISO products at the bottom, which are the products that we have created, are principally designed for multiple purposes and applied to M&A as an afterthought. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see from one of the points that the Caldwell team was just talking about, which is now the latest evolutions that everyone is talking about, of course, are in the context of generative AI. And when you look at some of the very few M&A focused reports on the use of generative AI in M&A, if you look at the left-hand chart, which I suspect you can't read, but it basically shows that the number of practitioners using generative AI at different stages of an M&A deal, which is the red bar, is highest in conducting due diligence and lowest as the deal proceeds, which highlights the point that Marcus was making, which is AI can be used in due diligence, but actually there's very little application of technology to the post-closing and post-merger phase, which Marcus highlighted as being critical. If we move on to the next phase, there's a principle that I would like to try to explain, which I think is really important in breaking down the application of technology to due diligence. And it's a point that Marcus alluded to. And this is a point that I think is best understood by understanding and thinking about other industries like oil and gas. If we take oil and gas as an industry, you break it down into upstream, midstream, and downstream. So upstream is basically the extraction of the resources. Downstream is the turning of those resources into something usable, and the midstream is everything in between the two. If you look at where technology has been focused, as the Caldwell team mentioned, it's being used in M&A and due diligence for well over 10 years now, but pretty much all of the technology is focused in the upstream area. What do I mean by that? I mean finding issues. It's doing the diligence itself. It's undertaking the due diligence requests, undertaking the analysis and providing DD reports. And that's usually where the technology and the support stops. That's really unhelpful, and in particular highlights the point that Marcus was making, which is, great, we found problems, we've got outputs from diligence, but so what? How is that going to help you once you've acquired the company? That is valuable to you when you turn it into something downstream, helping you turn that into something that helps you buy, manage, operate, and extract value from the company. So that's where we come into play with the product that we have created, which is CISO Diligence. We also think the midstream part is critical. People are spending a lot of money on due diligence, and what they're doing is they're creating reports. As Marcus said, they're kind of sitting there and rotting. People aren't using them very much, but you pay for them. How do you use that data on your future deals and get a better return for them? So what I would encourage people to do is when they're thinking about technology in M&A, acknowledge that there's a lot of it, but acknowledge that actually focusing only on the upstream diligence means you're not unlocking the value later on in the process. And the beauty with the way that the Caldwell team and the Malakut team think about this is being technology forward allows you to approach things more efficiently and differently, and that's why partnering between CISO and the Caldwell team actually unlocks a lot of value that typical arrangements and relationships do not. So I will end there I'm very happy to take any questions or comments later, but all of the data that I've covered is in the slides, so I won't go over it in more detail now.
こちらの表に関しましても、詳細を説明するのはちょっと時間の関係で控えさせていただきたいと思います。ただ、申し上げたかったのはですね、こちらのシングルソーステクノロジーズの創業者であるロボット、コールドウェルの方では、このご紹介差し上げている商品、シーソースイートですね、こちらに関して、業務の提供をして開発をしている、ちょうどそういうところでして、内容に関しましては、おそらく、説明を聞くよりも見た方が早いのではないかと思います。実際のところ、我々の方でも今デモをやっているところでして、特にデューデリジェンスの自動化に関しては、まだまだ初期段階であるんですけれども、かなりの部分を省力化できるのではないのかなと感じているところです。もしも、ご興味がある方がいらっしゃいましたら、我々の方でもデモをご提供させていただきますので、何なりと後ほどお話しいただければと思います。それでは Q&A セッションに移りたいと思います。申し訳ございません。本当に時間がないので、もしも一つ二つ何かご質問等があれば、挙手をしていただければと思います。日本語でも英語でも差し支えございません。ありがとうございます。
First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for your insightful presentation. So my question is related to the insurance product which you mentioned for the due diligence part. So suppose I'm like a VC investor, I'm investing into some company. So I have a team of talented professionals who are doing the due diligence part. And if, like, suppose I'm buying this insurance product for those transactions, then it puts a huge cost burden on the company, right? So just I would like to know what is the market attractiveness of these products? Is exactly company are going to the market, are they buying these products or not? Yes, due diligence itself is a very cost burden process. So I might have a question about.
I assume I think the costs are actually the insurance costs are actually far below the legal costs, but
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes. So maybe thank you for the question. I would say in Europe and the US, the W&I product, which is the basic product, which is based on the due diligence that is done, is bought in more than 50% of all private M&A cases. And that has different reasons, but on the sell side, usually the fees for putting money in escrow, which is the alternative, are higher than the cost of the insurance. So ultimately, you either have to, in most cases, choose one or the others. As long as you have to give warranties to the buyer as the seller, you will have to put money in escrow in case there is a claim under the warranties, and most buyers will not buy without warranties. So you can either put money in escrow and pay escrow fees for the duration of the warranties that you give, which is years, or you can take out a policy. In many cases, the buyer pays for the policy, so that is also to be considered. I mean, that can be negotiated freely between the parties. In most cases, the buyer buys the policy, but the costs are comparatively low. It is different with identified risks, but then again, if you have a risk that is 10 million, if it materializes, and you can insure it for, let's say, 2% of 10 million, that might still be a good.
what do you, how many times, or do you have statistics on when you do a minority investments, early stage investments, how many times? I mean, we see an increase in the use of W&I insurance. Usually it's depending on the market, roughly 1% of the investment amount, or the cap for the limit on the insurance. So if you buy, so if you invest and your coverage is 20%, it's what is it? 1%
of that.
Of the 20 million investment amount, or the cap that you have on the insurance. So
sometimes even lower, but yes.
But sometimes even below.
And for it only became so broadly accepted because the price has gone down significantly over the years, and it still is going down right now. And especially for minority investments as well.
Yeah, so if you invest 10 million, you want to insure an insurance for that 10 million investment up to 10 million, you take 1% of that amount, or even less, would be the cost of the insurance. And the brokerage fees is already covered?
It's included in that.
It's also included.
Would be great if it was on top.
We see, for Japanese investors, actually, we get a lot of questions around that, because, I mean, 1% of 10 million, and you have, like, basically when you invest in a startup, it fails, there's maybe some remaining residual IP value, but other than that, there's not much left. So to have that insurance then, that can also cover IP valuation, right, or IP issues with the target, is usually providing a lot more comfort for Japanese companies.
And ideally, if you're the buyer, this convinces the seller to give you more warranties in the first place, because the seller does not have to worry about being liable.
In the cases used about the WNI is increasing in Japan, maybe double to 2 to 2.5% times higher than it was 5-10 years ago. So everybody's very comfortable using this product in the M&A transaction.
And claims get paid, which would be, I guess, the next question.
Yeah, will it get paid? Yes, it will be.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Just as a continuation to that, can you do that for Series A to Series C rounds?
It generally depends on the size, but you can. The availability of the product, just a few years ago, insurers wouldn't do transactions unless they were at least, let's say, 80 million in enterprise value. But the product has become easier, more easy to deal with for clients as well, and cheaper. So generally, there is nothing that cannot be insured in principle. And the size, we have insured now transactions with enterprise values as low as 3 million. So everything's generally possible.
Dan, yesterday you mentioned, like, what is the minimum, like a minimum coverage?
$30,000, depending on jurisdiction.
This is the premium, the minimum premium.
The minimum premium would be 30K. So then you can extrapolate, what, like, that would be 1% of the minimum, of the 3 million. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for answer. I was just wondering about how exactly did you like calculate the risk premium to be 1% or like something like that? It's like it's so hard to just like quantify the legal risks as well as like the geopolitical risks nowadays. I was just wondering about like how exactly do you like quantify?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm glad that I'm not the insurer, so we're not personally taking the risk. Ultimately, the insurers offer a price and we negotiate it as low as possible, of course, on behalf of our clients. Basically, how they approach any specific deal is they start with what is the jurisdiction. Japan is one of the safe jurisdictions from the viewpoint of insurers. Then they go to the industry where the deal is conducted. And then they will look more into the specifics of the transaction. So the broader the warranty catalog that is in the purchase agreement, and the more buyer-friendly the warranties are, the more likely it might be that there will be a claim. So that can impact the price to go up a little. But I've been about 3 years doing this, and mostly focused on the European side. But it has always moved between 0.7% and maximum 1.5, 1.6%. So it's hard to say for me exactly how they arrive at the individual offer for every transaction. And of course, we make use of the competition that we have in every market, as well, and in Japan, of course, as well. But it's fair to say that 1% is an average that we've seen.
Can I just also ask a question about like who will be the main target? Is it like a corporate or like a VC, like anyone?
Now it's anyone. It used to be that private equity investors were really pushing this product because for them, having a clean exit and being able to distribute the funds that they receive in a transaction is most important because they want to maybe close the fund, they need to get the money back to their investors. So they pushed the product into the market quite aggressively because they said we cannot sell without this. The alternative is not giving any warranties, which again buyers don't want. By now it is really common for corporates as well, and now as mentioned, it came from bigger transactions and now it's becoming more common on smaller ones as well. But it's not really industry dependent or investor dependent anymore.
I have a question for the Caldwell team. Does your practice include practice in the field of copyright?
I can take it, sure. Yes, absolutely. We are comprehensive IP services and copyright, trade secret, litigation, and then copyright, trade secret, trademark, and patenting. So all areas of intellectual property we service, help value, and help create value for companies.
Any significant experiences that you can share about in the copyright field, especially in the US?
So we've done some litigation where there's what often happens is there'll be employees or customers of these companies that are taking their copyrighted materials and then just using them as their own, right? The trick with copyright cases, whether it's something as simple as that, or we do things in luxury goods, also in the art world, and we also do some amount of work in the entertainment world as well with copyright. The trick is that the dollars justify the cost of litigation, right? Which with copyrights is typically not the case. Oftentimes, for copyrights, that the outcome of litigation, any sort of monetary exchange would be very small, usually, and so it doesn't often justify the cost of the lawyers. But sometimes it does if you know there's enough damages liability.
So just the copyrights themselves might not warrant the litigation, but the copyright practice for us, of course, is also very important on this side when we acquire software that targets for our clients. We just had a situation where we acquired a software asset from a US company for a German life science company, and we figured out during the due diligence that apparently a lot of the source code for that particular software that we wanted to acquire had already been shared in advance with one of the major investors in that company, in the seller company, and then we had the issue that obviously this major investor was also a direct competitor to our client who wanted to acquire the software. Us figuring that out and obviously then leveraging the copyright issues that were resulting from that led to a significant price reduction ultimately, because this major investor also wanted to get some money out of this deal, because right after the transaction, the sell side entity was dissolved, and the purchase price or the consideration was distributed, where the major investor also got some money, and in return gave our purchasing client insurances that they would not use or further develop the software that they technically have stolen from one of their portfolio companies.
So those copyright issues can be included in those warranty insurance that the insured. I think that was IP was focused basically on their patents and trademarks and those kind of regular tech related.
You would have a warranty in a purchase agreement or an investment agreement that tells you that there are no copyright infringements, right? And I assume that it's coverable.
Absolutely, it's absolutely coverable. I think it's part of those policies, and available also for using patents, trade secrets, trademarks, and copyrights is part of a value assessment that you can borrow against, also using a collateral insurance product.
Thank you very much. And also, there's one more question. Those insurances should be bought by a single party. I mean, you mentioned, I think, the buyer basically buys the policy, but is there a case that both parties, it's beneficial to both parties? So, like 50% from the buyer, 50% from the seller buys the policy. Is that possible?
Just In terms of cost, absolutely possible. The beneficiary, I agree, both parties benefit indirectly, but as soon as the buyer has, after closing the target, it means that the damage will actually be incurred by him unless the buyer gets the money back from either the seller or the insurer. That's why he's the beneficiary just from the insurance perspective. But that doesn't mean, I mean, the seller can pay for the whole thing, or the parties can negotiate between them a 50% split, and that is not uncommon. That happens all the time. And it's even possible to have a sell-side policy where the seller buys insurance against the claim coming from the buyer, and also including for the costs that it then will need to defend itself against the claim of the buyer. Usually the only reason why that doesn't happen is that the seller does not do thorough due diligence on its own target. It's usually the buyer that does the due diligence, and as we said, the policy is based on the insurance. But everything is possible generally as long as the conditions are met.
Thank you.
何かご質問ございますでしょうか。
Sorry, just a quick one about the soul side diligence product. So, is there a like a free trial product that we can just try for the?
No, we have to ask Rob directly.
Yeah.
We set up pilots for organizations to trial it, so absolutely yes.
はい、こちらでではセミナーを終了させていただきたいと思います。皆様、1時間半長い間ありがとうございました。